and I want to make it clear before I make my wider arguments for the benefit of local residents in my constituency of rural Worcestershire, who I've had the pleasure of meeting at the site itself, that I strongly oppose the solar farm development proposals for 287 acres of beautiful rural farmland in my constituency in the Stock Green, Inkborough area at the Roundhill Wood site. I've been vocal on the subject. I've lodged my objections with the Planning Authority and on the public record and in the press, and I do so again. When I met the Roundhill Wood Solar Farm Opposition Group and its lead spokesman, the indefatigable Phil Coathup, I was completely persuaded by their reasoning. Phil isn't able to be with us today, but I am 100% sure that he is watching, so hello Phil. Hello Tigger, who's a horse, and thank you for all that you've done, and thank you also to my honourable friend for calling this debate and giving us all this opportunity to air our concerns of our constituents. So actually a lot of the comments that I'm going to make, I'm going to curtail slightly because my friend has made them so well, but I echo many of them. Residents in my seat have told me that they are wholly supportive of renewable energy, as am I, from solar power, and the ambition of tackling climate change more generally, but have a number of concerns. The loss of prime agricultural land at a time of war. Residents argue, and I couldn't agree more, that farming subsidies should not be used to encourage more solar farms. What we really need are more wheat and dairy farms so that we can be sustainable as a population. Of course, the impact on green spaces, the beautiful area, the risk of fire and hazard, as we've seen in many others of these developments. Residents fear that there could be fires and electrical storms and many other issues that have a dangerous impact on the area. And in our particular case, it's the distance from the grid. The two planning applications submitted for this project will cause massive intrusion into communities. The primary site is located in Inkborough, while the national grid substation is located in Feckenham, meaning that there will have to be extensive cabling between these two sites. And there's a further aspect to this particular proposal, Mr Henderson, which is the loss of the literary landscape. Of course, in our Worcestershire countryside, we're very proud of our connection to J.R.R. Tolkien. That is known and said to be where he lived and worked when he was escaping from Birmingham. Some of his work is thought to have a significant inspiration taken from our beautiful fields and areas. And in fact, Andrew Morton recently came to my constituency to discuss the importance of this area in inspiring Tolkien's The Shire. According to Andrew Morton, Tolkien's visits to his aunt's farm called Bag End in Dormston directly inspired the name of the house of the fictional character Bilbo Baggins. And if this application were to pass, this landscape would become a construction site. The views that inspired great works of literature would be lost forever. And residents also suggest, as my honourable friend has said, that we should put solar panels on rooftops, warehouse roofs, which are of course ample elsewhere in my constituency because it's a logistics hub. Although it is clear that this can't meet the UK's whole solar power needs, of course.
I'm intrigued by her and my other honourable friend's literary commentary, but I'd like just to draw attention and ask a question on the economics. She'll be aware that the strike price for solar power was £47 per megawatt hour. The last talk was going to go to £61 per megawatt hour. And what's underpinning farmers deciding that perhaps they should give their land up is that the economics of farming are finding it very difficult to compete with the economics of the pricing at these auctions. And does she also agree that if it is the case, which I believe is true, that the government now has maybe 4 times the amount of solar production capacity on offer than it actually requires, that there needs to be an economic answer both to the pricing of solar power and to support our farmers?
My honourable friend has made some excellent points. He's right, of course, that these commercial pressures, as well as the legislation that we signed up for, which I was happy to vote for to reach net zero, but between the two of these pressures are actually driving this. We've got a lot of unintended outcomes for this policy, which was introduced for laudable aims, and it is time to pause this and look again. So, people have talked about this issue of NIMBYs, and I think it is a really interesting issue because people will ask, where would you put these solar panels instead? And where are you going to put the additional ones that will be required to fulfil our solar capacity targets? Because I think our British energy strategy includes ambitions to have 70 gigawatts of solar capacity by 2035, and I think we're at something like 15.7 gigawatts as of January this year. I believe that if we oppose something and we don't like what's in front of us, we should actually suggest what would be done instead. I think we should be constructive. We shouldn't just oppose things and not come up with a solution. That's what Labour does. That's not my style. And by the way, on the subject of Labour, it's unclear to me and local residents what Labour's position locally is on this solar power project. It shouldn't really surprise anyone that Labour locally are sitting on the fence, or perhaps sitting on a solar panel, if I may stretch the analogy, on this issue. It's what they do on every issue. They say one thing and they do another. Or they change their mind every 5 minutes, and they're certainly doing that locally. But people will probably say to me, well, aren't you just a NIMBY? And maybe I should ask myself this as well, because as some of you might know, I had the great privilege of serving as Housing and Planning Minister, and I'm very familiar with these debates. But I say to my honourable friends, and right honourable friends, it's the wrong question. It is the wrong way of looking at the problem, and I'll explain why briefly. Deciding where to put infrastructure, whether it's housing, roads or solar farms, is always going to be controversial. We need to build these things. Nobody wants them next to them. Certainly nobody, to my knowledge, has ever campaigned for more development, be it housing or infrastructure, next to them. Therefore, it's often said, those people must be NIMBYs and their views pushed aside in the interests of progress. There's no easy way around this, even if we prioritise the views of local communities, because the idea that there's anywhere else in the country where somebody won't object to something being built is a fantasy. So I say to the House, it is idiotic to divide people into two camps, NIMBY and not NIMBY, unless they're Liberal Democrats, of course, who are bananas. That stands for build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. That's their policy. I have the greatest of respect for the YIMBY movement. I really do. I think they're doing some good things. But I suspect that were those people to move to a different area, out of a city into the countryside, or next to a development site, or in the green belt, and that was about to be built over, they might change their view. And, I do speak as someone who's got a little bit of understanding of this area. I think all of us MPs do. We understand human nature, and we know that people will deceive themselves and others. I would be happy to be proved wrong, but the evidence in front of me strongly suggests I'm right. So it's pointless and wrong to attack NIMBYs when everyone essentially feels the same about our landscape and our area. Yes, I'll give it to my friend.
That's right. And if a Member of Parliament doesn't defend their own area, then surely they're not really doing their job, are they? My backyard is South Holland-the-Leapings, and I will certainly defend it to the death from the kind of menace that this kind of large-scale solar represents.
Of course. I really enjoy hearing my right honourable friend speak about this matter, because he has, more than anyone else, brought this concept of beauty and that impact on our well-being into public policy more than anybody else, and I thank him for that. I want to deliberately move away from this concept of blaming people for being NIMBYs, because unless we actually understand how human psychology works, we won't be able to solve these problems of where to put things that nobody wants. I do want to set out, I think there's another way to think about it. It is, of course, much easier and cheaper to install infrastructure on a virgin field rather than engineer it somewhere else in the built environment or brownfield. That is more favourable, but it's going to take cash. If anybody tells you you can simply complete a project on a brownfield for the same cost as on a greenfield, they've no idea what they're talking about. Yes, Labour, I am looking at you, because that is essentially their plan for reforming the planning system. Why? Well, brownfield is brown for a reason. Something else was there before, that something else needs to be removed, the site put back to a clean condition. That involves removing toxic materials and engineering problems. That costs money. That's why we have government agencies and grants funded to the tune of £10.5 billion in the case of Homes England to do exactly that. But that money, of course, is our money. It's taxpayers' money. If you want more of it, you have to spend more money on it, meaning less money to spend on all the other things that voters want and the opposition has promised, like the NHS and so on. Oh, and by the way, Labour have also repeatedly said that they want to build on the green belt, or maybe the grey belt, whatever that is. Now, look, I'll be honest, there is some merit in that argument. That is because we're actually already doing that. That is government policy when it's done sensibly in consultation with local communities and backed by government funding. This actually is happening all over the country. Where it isn't happening, surprise, surprise, is in Labour-run planning authorities, most notably London, where Sadiq Khan is woefully behind on all his housing targets, even though he's been generously subsidised by taxpayers who aren't lucky enough to live in London to the tune of £4 billion of their money from around the rest of the country, subsidising its frankly useless delivery record. And what's sad and shameful about this is the fact that the need for housing and the cost of it in London is acute. The so-called housing crisis, which frankly is just as much an immigration crisis as a housing crisis, is worse in London. And in fact, if the Labour Mayor of London actually built enough houses in the capital, we could meet the annual national quota with room to spare and prevent speculative greenbelt development in the home counties and around the country, such as areas where we represent. So, if we want a planning system that works with local people, we do need to take a step back and look at our landscape and ask ourselves about those incentives that are driving those unfavourable outcomes. We take the politics out of this. We're talking about human nature and human behaviour, and it is an illustration of the tragedy of the commons. Projects such as solar farms are needed to reach communal goals such as net zero, and most people agree that renewable energy is a good idea. So, yes, I will. Yep.
Right about strategic overview. Would you not agree with me that one thing we need is a national policy on solar farms? Does the government want them to be out in the middle countryside and large scale, or does it want to be smaller sites? At the moment, there is no national policy for the matter. Should there not be one brought in with no further delay?
I strongly agree with my right honourable friend. He's completely right, and I think most of us will be making the same point, and I'm sure the Minister will update us. I just want to say a few brief words about environmental issues, if the House will indulge me for a couple more minutes, because we do need to talk about the environmental agencies which exist, and the proliferating plethora of reasons for objecting to development on environmental grounds. Now, we have a number of agencies, most notably Natural England and the Environment Agency and others. But what we haven't seen them doing anything useful, such as protecting farmland or our green space or our precious environment or nature to tackle projects such as we're all concerned about in our local areas. No, what are they actually doing? They are inventing and coming up with ridiculous ideas like nutrient neutrality, which in fact is holding up 100,000 much-needed houses all across the country where people are screaming out for them and they're desperate for them. And guess who voted against the proposals that we brought forward to tackle that? Well, of course, it was Labour. So perhaps if they were serious about unblocking development and house building, they could have acted on that. Look, I accept that there's a need for regulation and enforcement, but we should direct our attention to this huge number of quangos and agencies who are indulging in mission creep way outside what was originally envisaged. We have woken up and found that the ECHR is now regulating about climate change for some people in Switzerland, saying it's violating their human rights. Now look, we believe in conserving, that's what the Conservatives do, but we should focus on conserving plants, trees, nature, wildlife, landscapes and greenbelt, not ever enlarging highly paid bureaucratic jobs. These are people that always want to conserve their own organisation and the multitude of rules and regulations. We need to go back to our core Conservative values and ask why we have allowed the state to create so many of these laws. We can't really blame people for using the protections that we've given them. So that, again, is human nature, and that is why we need to go back, I think, to the drawing board with the way that we are using our land. I will conclude, Mr Henderson, by thanking again the House for holding this debate. It's a complex and lengthy subject, but to come back for the avoidance of doubt, I oppose the proposals in my constituency. I recognise there are no easy soundbite answers, but my constituents deserve to be listened to. I will be a voice to them. They cannot be denigrated for standing up for their local area, for caring about it. My right honourable friend for Houghton has made the point eloquently that that's why they moved to the area. They worked very hard, they saved up, they bought a house, they moved to a desirable area, and we are their voice and we will fight for that.
Yeah.